Chapter 2, Qingniu Town. This is a small town, which is actually just a big village. It's called Qingniu Town, and only the country bumpkins who live in the nearby mountain valleys and lack experience would call it Qingniu City over and over again. This is what Zhang Er, the gatekeeper for over 10 years, thinks in his heart. Qingniu Town is indeed not big, with only one main street called Qingniu Street running east to west. Even the inn only has one, called Qingniu Inn, located at the west end of the rectangular town. So, if travelers passing by don't want to camp in the wilderness, they can only stay here. Right now, a horse-drawn carriage that looked like it had traveled a long way entered Qingniu Town from the west. It swiftly passed by the gate of Qingniu Inn without stopping, and continued racing to the other end of town until it stopped in front of the entrance of Quanxiang Restaurant. Quanxiang Restaurant wasn't big, even somewhat old-fashioned, but it had an ancient charm. As it was lunchtime, there were still many customers eating inside, and almost every seat was occupied. A round-faced man with a small mustache and a dark-skinned boy of about 10 got off the carriage and swaggered directly into the restaurant. The regular customers in the restaurant recognized the fat man, knowing him as the owner of the restaurant, Fat Han, but nobody recognized the boy. "Old Han, this black kid looks a lot like you. Is he the son you had with some other woman?" someone suddenly joked. This caused the people nearby to burst out laughing. "Hey! This is my relative, my nephew," Fat Han said, not only without getting angry but also with a hint of pride. These two were Li Han and his third uncle, who had just entered the town after traveling for 3 days. Fat Han greeted a few regular customers and took Li Han to the back of the restaurant, arriving in a secluded courtyard. "Little Li, rest well here in this room. Wait until the steward from the inner sect arrives, and then I will call you over. I need to go out first to greet some regular customers," Fat Han said kindly, pointing to the wing room in the courtyard. After speaking, he turned around hurriedly and walked out. When he reached the door, he seemed to feel a little uneasy and added a sentence of caution. "Don't run around. There are too many people in town, and don't get lost. It's best not to leave the courtyard." "Okay." Seeing that Li Han had answered obediently, he truly left with peace of mind. Feeling very tired, Li Han collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep without any shyness like a child. At night, a servant brought food. Although it wasn't a feast, it was still delicious. After finishing his meal, another servant came in and took away the leftover bowls. It was only then that his third uncle walked in calmly. "How was the food? Do you miss home?" his third uncle asked as he came in. "Yeah, a little," Li Han replied obediently. His third uncle seemed satisfied with his answer and started chatting with him about some trivial things, boasting about some interesting things he had experienced. Gradually, Li Han lost his inhibition and started to laugh with him. So, 2 days passed like this. On the third day, when Li Han finished his dinner and was waiting for his third uncle to tell him some martial art stories, another carriage stopped in front of the restaurant. This carriage was painted black and shiny all over, and the horse pulling it was also an uncommon and outstanding yellow horse. The most eye-catching thing was a small, triangular black flag with a rusty, mysterious character inserted on the side of the carriage frame, with silver letters and red edges, naturally emitting an indescribable mysterious color. Seeing this flag, all the seasoned martial arts experts who moved within hundreds of miles knew that an important figure from 7 Mysterious Gates, one of the 2 big bosses in this area, had arrived. 7 Mysterious Gates, also known as 7 Absolute Gates, was founded by the famous 7 Absolute Masters 200 years ago. It once dominated Jingzhou for several decades and even infiltrated several states adjacent to Jingzhou, and had a great reputation throughout the entire Yu Kingdom. However, after the death of 7 Absolute Masters, the power of 7 Mysterious Gates declined sharply, and it was squeezed out of Jingzhou City, the capital of Jingzhou, by other sections 100 years ago, the sect was forced to relocate to the most remote place in Qingzhou, Xianxia Mountain, where it took root and became a third-rate local force. There is a saying that a skinny camel is bigger than a horse. 7 Mysterious Gates was a major sect after all, and its potential was still not to be underestimated. After coming to Caixia Mountain, it immediately controlled more than a dozen small towns, including Qingniu town, and had 3,000 to 4,000 disciples. It was one of the 2 big bosses in the area with a well-deserved reputation. The only other force that could resist 7 Mysterious Gates in the area was Wild Wolf Gang. The predecessor of Wild Wolf Gang was a group of marauding horse bandits in Qingzhou. After several government attacks, some of them accepted the government's peace agreement, while the rest became Wild Wolf Gang. However, the brutality, bloodthirstiness, and willingness to kill and fight of the horse bandits were passed down, so 7 Mysterious Gates often found itself at a disadvantage when it clashed with Wild Wolf Gang. Although Wild Wolf Gang controlled more towns, they were not good at management, and in terms of wealth, they were far inferior to the towns under 7 Mysterious Gates. Wild Wolf Gang was very jealous of several of the more financially prosperous towns under 7 Mysterious Gates' control, and recently provoked frequent conflicts between the two, which made the current head of 7 Mysterious Gates very worried. This was also the main reason why 7 Mysterious Gates had been recruiting disciples in recent years. A thin man in his 40s jumped off the carriage. He was agile and clearly had excellent martial arts skills. He also seemed very familiar with the area and strode directly toward the room where Li Han was. As soon as his third uncle saw this man, he immediately approached respectfully and bowed. "Wang Protector, why did you personally bring someone here?" he asked. "Humph." Wang Protector snorted coldly, his face full of arrogance. "This period is not peaceful on the road, so we need to strengthen our defense. The elder told me to personally come and collect the person." "Enough talk, is this child the one you want to recommend?" he asked. Yes. This is my nephew. I hope you can take care of him on the way," Fat Han said, taking out a heavy bag from his body and handing it over discreetly. Wang Protector weighed the bag and his expression relaxed a bit. "Han Fatty, you are quite good at being a person. I will take good care of your nephew on the road. It's getting late. Let's hit the road," he said. Chapter 3-7 Profound Gates. The smell inside the car was obviously unpleasant, which was not surprising since almost 30 children were crammed into a carriage that was only meant to carry a dozen people. Although the children were much smaller than adults, the carriage was still overcrowded. Li Han cleverly huddled into a corner of the carriage, secretly observing the other children inside. The children who came to participate in the entrance examination were clearly divided into 3 categories based on their clothing and background. The first category consisted of a group of well-dressed young men sitting in the middle of the carriage, surrounded by most of the other children. The young man's name was Wu Yan, who was 13 years old and the oldest person in the carriage. Although he was already over the age limit, he had a cousin who married a powerful figure in the 7 Profound Gates, so his age was not an issue. Wu Yan's family owned a martial arts school, and they were quite wealthy. He had also practiced some martial arts since he was young, although he was not particularly skilled. However, he was more than enough to deal with children like Li Han, who only had some brute strength and had never learned martial arts. Obviously, people like Wu Yan, who were wealthy, influential, and knew some martial arts, naturally became the big brother of most of the children in the carriage. The second category of children were those who surrounded Wu Yan. They came from various backgrounds, with some owning shops, some working, and others relying on their skills to make a living, etc. However, they all had one thing in common: they grew up in the city and had naturally learned some skills to observe human nature and pursue profit from their elders. Therefore, these people surrounded Wu Yan and called him Young Master Wu or Big Brother Wu. Wu Yan seemed accustomed to this and was very pleased with these titles. The last category of children were like Li Han. They came from remote and poor areas, and their families generally relied on the mountains and waters to survive. They were the fewest in the carriage, only 5 or 6 people, and they often looked timid and were afraid to speak loudly. They formed a sharp contrast with the other children who laughed and talked loudly and those who were occasionally noisy. The carriage left Qingniu town and headed west, stopping at several places and picking up several children along the way. Finally, on the 5th day in the evening, they arrived at the 7 Profound Gates headquarters on Kaihua Mountain. All the children got off the carriage and were deeply fascinated by the colorful sunset scenery of Kaihua Mountain. They continued to move forward until Wang, the guardian of the law, urged them to move on. Kaihua Mountain, formerly known as Luofeng Mountain, was said to have been formed when a 5-colored phoenix landed here in ancient times. Later, people found that the mountain was exceptionally beautiful at sunset, just like a colorful cloud, so it was renamed Kaihua Mountain. Of course, since it was taken over by the 7 Profound Gates, outsiders could no longer come here to appreciate such beautiful scenery at will. Kaihua Mountain was the second largest mountain in Jingzhou, second only to another mountain called Baimang Mountain. This mountain covered the largest area, with a dozen or so peaks, all of which were occupied by various branch halls of the 7 Profound Gates. The main peak of Kaihua Mountain, Sunset Peak, was extremely dangerous. Not only was it steep and high, but there was only one path from the foot of the mountain to the top. After the 7 Profound Gates established their headquarters here, they set up 13 visible and invisible checkpoints along the way, making it virtually foolproof. Li Han looked around while following the people in front of him on the stone steps. Suddenly, the queue in front stopped, and a hearty voice was heard. "Wang, my old friend, why are you so late? You are 2 days behind schedule. Brother Yu, we were delayed on the road. I'm sorry to have troubled you." Wang bowed respectfully to an old man with a red face, showing a hint of flattery on his face. "How many batches of students have been sent up the mountain?" "This is the 17th batch." "Okay." The master called you took a few glances at Li Han and the others. "Take them to the Qingniu courtyard to rest well tonight. The qualified disciples will be selected tomorrow morning. Those who fail will be sent down the mountain early to avoid breaking the rules on the mountain." "Understood, Brother Yu." Walking up the stone steps, all the children were excited, but no one dared to speak loudly. Although they were young, they knew that this was where their fate would be decided. Wang led the way with a smile on his face, greeting people he knew on the way. It was evident that he had a good relationship with many people in the 7 Profound Gates. Most of the people they met along the way were dressed in blue satin clothes with swords or knives hanging from their waists. Occasionally, some people who practiced martial arts with empty hands also had bulges around their waists, carrying something unknown. From their behavior and movements, it could be seen that these people were agile and had some decent martial arts skills. Li Han and the others were taken to a shorter mountain peak where there was a mud house at the top. They stayed there for a night. In his dreams at night, Li Han dreamed that he was wearing a golden robe, holding a golden sword, and had unparalleled martial arts skills. He beat the blacksmith's son in the village who he had never been able to beat before, feeling extremely powerful, and he still remembered it when he woke up the next morning. After waking up in the morning, Wang did not let everyone have breakfast and took them directly to a slope covered with bamboo trees at the foot of the mountain. There, they met Mr. Yu and several other young people they did not recognize. Chapter 4, Bone Refining Cliff. Master Yu loudly announced in front of everyone, "Listen up everyone, follow the small path in the bamboo forest and you'll arrive at 7 Profound Sect's Bone Refining Cliff. The first section is the bamboo forest, followed by a rocky area, and finally a mountain cliff. Only those who reach the top of the cliff can enter 7 Profound Sect. If you can't make it before noon, you may not become a formal disciple, but if you show remarkable skills, you can still be accepted as a named disciple. Li Han naturally didn't understand what a named disciple meant, but he knew he had to move forward and climb the mountain. He looked ahead and saw a sloping hill with many thick and thin bamboo growing on it. It didn't seem too difficult to climb. Li Han glanced at the other children and didn't want to lose to anyone his age. The atmosphere between the children suddenly became tense. Master Yu looked at the rising sun and said, "It's almost time, let's prepare to leave. Don't be afraid, the senior brothers will protect you from behind and won't let you face danger." Li Han looked back at the group of young men behind him. They were called senior brothers and were probably disciples who had been accepted before. If he joined, would he get to wear the same impressive clothes? While he was pondering, Li Han noticed that the other children had already rushed into the bamboo forest. Seeing this, he quickly followed. The bamboo forest was probably very wide. As soon as the more than 30 children entered the forest, they immediately scattered. A thin and long senior brother followed closely behind Li Han, his face cold and silent. Li Han was a little scared and didn't dare to talk to him. He just raised his feet, lowered his body, and slowly moved forward along the slope. The bamboo forest didn't look too difficult at first, but after walking for a while, it became tiring. Li Han's legs became heavier and heavier, and he had to use one hand to pull on the stem of the bamboo to move forward with less effort. He persisted for a long time and was exhausted. He had to sit on a random dirt mound and catch his breath. Li Han looked back at the thin and long senior brother. Although the ground was very steep, he was still standing motionless, as if he hadn't touched a speck of dust, standing tall like the bamboo around him. He was silently watching Li Han from below. Seeing the senior brother's cold gaze, Li Han became even more scared and quickly turned his head back. He heard heavy breathing coming from the front, indicating that other people who were climbing faster than him had also stopped to rest. After staying in place for a while, Li Han hurriedly moved forward. The slope became steeper, and Li Han's strength became weaker and weaker. To avoid falling, he had to bend his waist, move both hands and feet, and rely on his sturdy clothes. Otherwise, his joints and knees would have been scraped raw. Finally, he almost made it out of the dense bamboo forest. However, the last part of the journey became increasingly difficult. The ground was covered in rocks, and there were fewer and fewer bamboo. Li Han could no longer pull the bamboo to move forward. He had to move forward inch by inch. When he finally emerged from the bamboo forest, he saw a vast space in front of him. A huge rocky cliff lay ahead, with several small bodies already climbing slowly upwards. Behind them were senior brothers dressed in the same clothes. Li Han didn't hesitate and ran towards the giant rock wall. The rock wall was made up of layers of sedimentary rock that had been heavily weathered. Some parts would crumble at the slightest touch, but many pieces of broken rocks were sharp and sturdy. After only the time it took to eat a meal, Li Han's hands were already covered in wounds, and his elbow and knee clothes were torn. Although the wounds were small fragments of rock penetrated the wounds and the pain intensified. Several people had already climbed further ahead, and Li Han thought of his family and his third uncle's words. He couldn't give up now. He had to catch up with the others. He used up all his strength, but he still couldn't catch up with the people at the front, and his body became heavier and heavier. He watched as the sun gradually climbed to the center of the sky, and yet, he was still far behind. At the forefront was Wu Yan, who was not only older Li Han but had also practiced martial arts and had a much stronger body than the other children. Li Han looked back and saw several figures still climbing behind him, all of them panting heavily. They had also exhausted their last bit of strength. Li Han could only smile bitterly in his heart. He underestimated the difficulty of this test. Fortunately, he didn't fall behind. He turned his head and saw his cold senior brother. After hesitating for a moment, Li Han decided to exert more effort and climb higher. Although he knew he couldn't reach the top before noon, it would be too embarrassing to give up now. Li Han stretched his stiff hands and used the little strength he had just recovered to slowly move up along the rope. However, at this point, Li Han's hands completely disobeyed him and could not hold on to the rope. After struggling for a moment, he still couldn't get any results.